Hello YouTubers, this is Jerron Dove and I am back with a brand new video. Now as you can tell by my bookshelf, I love to read. I love to get my hands onto literally everything you could think of, every topic. As you can probably maybe tell, let's take a little closer look. At the top of my bookshelf you see a lot of writing related magazines. I love to write, so I have a lot of different kind of grammar books, books about the writing craft, a book actually by Stephen King about writing that I really love right now, one of my favorites. And then on the second shelf I have more books of a more diverse nature, a lot of inspirational books, Christian based, inspirational books, Idiot's Guide for Assertiveness, Roger Ebert's movie yearbooks. I love reading the late Roger Ebert's reviews. I mean, just excellent reading material, and his writing is so incredible. Rolling Stone album guide. And I even have some books dedicated to what almost seems to be my lost passion of anime and manga. Hopefully I will be able to get back more into that. But the main focus of today's video is what's on the third shelf. As you see, this is a shelf dedicated, the third row of my shelf is dedicated exclusively to my professional wrestling books. And being a lifelong fan of professional wrestling, in addition to watching the product and keeping up with the latest news and developments, I learned the most about the wrestling business through reading. Just like in school, when you're studying for a test or you're doing research, I just love to read and learn about the history of this great business of professional wrestling. So today we're going to take a look at some of the books in my collection, and just to also give you some background history into just kind of how I go about researching wrestling or whatnot. I am a subscriber to the Wrestling Observer newsletter. It is by far the authoritative source of professional wrestling news from all around the world. People don't call it the Bible of the professional wrestling industry for a cute name. It truly is the gold standard of wrestling journalism. So I get a lot of my history from there. I also check out a great website called WrestlingScout.com. It's an excellent website that has profiles of wrestlers from the early 1900s up till the current day. Just an excellent historical tool. I also attend wrestling conventions. I attend the NWA Mid-Atlantic Fan Fest, NWA Legends Mid-Atlantic Fan Fest, which is held in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been on 2 occasions. I will be returning this year in August, so I'm looking forward to that, and just learning more about the great rich history of the business, particularly the business in my home state region of the Carolinas. So without further ado, let's get into this review. And basically this is to title it, I guess, or you could really call this a capsule review. I'm just going to go through my shelf from left to right, just give you my opinions on each book, not super in depth, but more so just to briefly what I like about each one, what I don't like. Unfortunately, due to just time constraints and life and other things that get in the way, I have not had the time to read every book, unfortunately, but I am going to make it my goal to pick back up and finish some of these books and start on others. So without further ado, let's start from the left. We're going to start with this very nifty book, Legends of Pro Wrestling. This book is by Tim Hornbaker, who is a very well-renowned wrestling historian. I love this cover. I mean, this cover is really just shows you let me go out a little bit. Yes, Legends of Professional Wrestling. You just see the different stars from various eras. You have Andre the Giant, Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, Rock, Cena, and then on the bottom, more legends of the industry. And this book is really essentially more like you can call it a scouting report, perhaps. just to go through, it really has profiles on most of the major names in professional wrestling from, my gosh, they start, I believe, actually during the, let's see, you start during, trying to, table of contents aren't that clear, during the pioneer period. So, you know, of course, you guys like the gotchas and trying to, excuse me, I'm trying to zoom in. I don't think I can like I want to. But just a really great, really well done book. A lot of information in here. And this book also, for me, serves as you can see, an autograph tool. I've taken this book to the last couple of fan fests, and the wrestlers there love to sign it. So I have quite a few signatures. I think Dr. Tom Pritchard, Rocky Kernodle. I believe I have Exotic Adrian Street, and a couple of others. So yeah, like this book. Up next, we have the Heroes of Wrestle, a book from the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series from Steven Johnson and Greg Oliver, two excellent Canadian wrestling journalists who they also both run or work heavily with the Slam Wrestling site, which I recommend any wrestling fan to check out. This book is a monster. I have not finished it. It is really an exhaustive, ranking and really just a historical document of the best baby faces in wrestling history. Of course, you can see heroes and icons. Just a massive book. I do hope to get through it one day. And one thing about this book that was very controversial is that it has a, and let's see if you can see it, and I need to hurry up. I may have to break this into two parts. I hope I don't. But as you can see, they have a ranking of the top 20 baby faces in wrestling history. And as you can see, The Rock is not present. You have Jim Londos. I don't know if you can even see it. This lighting is not the best, but you have Jim Londos number 1. Hulk Hogan number 2, Bruno Sammartino number 3, and so on. And then you have a section called The Next 5, and The Rock is not in there either, which is very, to me, kind of troubling, since Rock is one of the all-time biggest, most successful baby faces in the history of the industry. But aside from that, excellent historical read. All of these books in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series are just a historian's dream. You will learn so much from them. This brings me to my next book, Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Tag Teams. Once again, this is one of the earlier books of the Hall of Fame series. Just excellent book. If you really want to know about the history of tag team wrestling in North America, this is the book for you. If you're a tag team enthusiast, you can't do wrong by picking this book up, I tell you. Excellent. And of course, the cover, you have two of the greatest tag teams of all time, Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express. Up next, we have Professional Wrestling Intellectual by Joseph Babinsack. Joseph Babinsack is a writer for the Wrestling Observer website. I'm not sure how much writing he does these days, but he actually used to do a weekly column a few years ago. This book is actually a kind of a compilation of a lot of his articles and also some original writings. And a funny story with this is that this is the only book that I have ever been, I guess, given as part of a review. He gave me this book. He gave me a free copy of the book, which I wrote a review for on the Wrestling Observer website back in 2009. So this book holds a special place in my heart, and I like it. For nothing else, it is actually some great information in here. Some pretty good stories. Of course, a lot of them are articles that he's written over the years that were compiled, but seeing them all in one place, and it's pretty good. And also one thing about this book is that he has a heavy emphasis on independent wrestling, which even back in 2009, I was not really too hip on the indie scene. I'm more appreciative of it now, seeing, of course, the rise of NXT, which is essentially a super indie, as well as, Ring of Honor and, the other, what's the other group? The group in California, PWG, and just really seeing the impact that the indies have had on the North American wrestling scene. So it's a lot of good articles in here about the indie scene back during that period in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. Good book. Up next, Tangled Ropes, Superstar Billy Graham. This is one of, has been regarded by many as one of the best WWE produced biographies. Unfortunately, I've not got to read it yet, but I've just heard nothing but praise about this from the time it was released, so I definitely want to get into this. I actually got this from a used bookstore, M&K, for $5. Up next, Have a Nice Day, Mick Foley. This is the book that I can't say started it all, but it really did start it all. Of course, wrestling books, wrestlers have written books for years, even before this book was released in 1999. Of course, some of the most well-known books were Hooker by Lou Thez, Pure Dynamite, Dynamite Kid, but it was this book, Mick Foley's first autobiography, released in 1999, that really blew the lid off of the pro wrestling publishing industry. And ever since then, up until this very day, wrestlers are releasing books at a rapid rate. Pretty much every major star in the industry over the last 15, 20 years has written a book of some kind, an autobiography, and this book really was responsible. This was also the book that gave the notion that professional wrestling fans actually can read and are intelligent. And it was a New York Times bestseller, and to this day, probably the most single influential wrestling book of all time. And of course, it was the first book of Mick Foley's career as an author, which he's written numerous acclaimed books, and he's even dabbled into fiction writing as well. So this was a very noteworthy book in the annals of pro wrestling history. Moving on next, Dusty Rhodes and American Dream, Dusty Rhodes autobiography. I believe this was released in maybe 2006ish or 7. Unfortunately, haven't read it yet, but I definitely plan to do so. To Be the Man, Ric Flair, one of the all-time great wrestling biographies. I can just read it. Please, you will do yourself a huge favor. I actually bought this book in 2004. I remember buying this book from Barnes & Noble shortly after it was released. Another classic biography. This is Undisputed by Chris Jericho, his second biography. The Lion's Tale was awesome in its own right, but this book just upped the ante, especially when you hear the thing I like best about this book is just the candid nature in which Jericho talks about his initial WWE run in 1999 and just all of the different political battles and just things he overcame to get to where he ended up at in WWE as one of the biggest stars in the company's history. Incredible book. Hitman, Bret Hart. Once again, continuing the tradition, continuing just some excellent biographies. This would be on most people's list as one of the all-time great biographies. Bret the Hitman Hart. This book covers everything. His career from starting out in Stampede Wrestling to WWF to WCW and everything in between and after, and just tremendous book. Classic. A different book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Pro Wrestling. I'm pretty sure I got this book from a used bookstore, or maybe it was Amazon. But this is actually a surprisingly good book. It was released in 2000, so it was released around the time of the pro wrestling boom in North America. So a lot of information about 2099 through 2000 era WCW, WWF, but there's also a surprising amount of good historical information in here as well as it's a book, the title, The Complete Idiot's Guide. So this is a great book that you could give a person who is really new to pro wrestling, and they could learn a lot from it. Highly recommended. The Death of WCW. This is the revised and expanded 10th anniversary edition that came out in 2014. Of course, this is, required reading for any wrestling fan. The definitive story of the rise and, more importantly, the fall of one of the most, it's probably next to WWE, the most important wrestling promotion in history, WCW. Well, I guess at least in North America. Excellent book. Larry Matisik's The Top 50, the 50 Greatest Professional Wrestlers of All Time, the definitive shoot. I really need to do a video on this. I actually wrote a review on my blog a couple of years ago. This book is an excellent historical tool. The ranking, let me just show you, at least while I open the book, just the rankings of, I don't know if you can see it too well, but this book generated a lot of controversy around the kind of wrestling historian community when it was released in, I think it was 2012. But it's a great read. Even if you don't agree with the rankings, you cannot come from reading this book without learning a great deal about the history of the business. Up next, Mad Dogs, Midgets, and Screwjobs. This is the untold story of how Montreal shaped the world of wrestling. Have not read it, but I've heard nothing but praise about this book. So hopefully I'll get to it. I'm trying to hurry up. I got a couple of more to get through. Shooters, The Toughest Men in Professional Wrestling by Jonathan Snowden. A really good book. This book really explores the tough guys in the professional wrestling industry. As you can see on the cover, you have Lou Thesz, Danny Hodge, current stars like Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. This book really goes into detail about the men who were legendary behind the scenes for their toughness in and outside of the ring. Very good, well-researched book. Next, we have Pain and Passion, The History of Stampede Wrestling, expanded and revised edition. The definitive book on the Stampede Wrestling territory, which was one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for, one of the most progressive territories of wrestling throughout the 60s through 80s. So many wrestlers who went on to have Hall of Fame level careers got their start in Stampede. Of course, notwithstanding, of course, the Harts, Brett and Owen and other members of the family, but just, Jushin Liger, Hiroshi Hase, a lot of great international talent got their start in Stampede. Excellent book. Briscoe, this was the autobiography of former NWA champion Jack Briscoe that came out before he passed away. I think this book came out maybe in 2005-ish or 4. Have not got around to reading it yet. Drawing Heat by The Hard Way by Larry Matisik. I read this book such a long time ago. It's hard to describe what it's about, but I believe it's really just kind of a book about the inner workings of the wrestling industry. But it was well written. Larry Matisik is awesome. Awesome writer. Up next we have 10 Pounds of Gold. The close look at the NWA World Championship belt. Of course, the old NWA Championship belt was, it was the most prestigious belt in all of wrestling for several decades until the rise of the WWF in the 80s. And this book gives you a history of all of the men who held that championship belt. Real good stuff in here. Sex, Lies, and Headlocks. The Real Story of Vince McMahon and World Wrestling Entertainment. This actually holds the distinction as being, I believe, the first wrestling book I ever technically read. I read this book, I believe, when I was still in high school, or maybe shortly after I graduated high school. I read it in a Walden bookstore in the mall. And this book, it really just goes through, really the rise of the WWF and kind of the different scandals and things that rocked the business behind the scenes throughout the 80s and 90s. Really good book if you just really want to learn about, the inner workings of WWF, during that 90s period. And real good. Can't really fault it. A Lion's Tale, Chris Jericho. This was Jericho's first book, his first autobiography, and this book set the bar high. Not only, I mean, it's an excellent book, but also one of the most humorous. Jericho's words, just Jericho has a way of writing that just makes you laugh out loud, but also there are so many poignant moments in there as well, just recapping an incredible career. And of course, this was the first book which took a look more at his international career, as he was a big star in Mexico, Japan, and in ECW and WCW before he got to WWF in 1999. The Professional Wrestling Field Guide. This little book packs a punch, kind of similar to the Legends of Wrestling book, but this book came out way before that. And this is really just kind of like a little capsule guide of wrestling history. A good book you can take around with you just to kill some time in the airport if you just want a quick dose of wrestling history, or to show someone, if someone at your job has a question about a wrestler, they could probably find the answer in this book. Now we're kind of running through time. We still got good time. Let me bring you to the books up here. These are more WWE books. Miscellaneous. This is a kid's book about Sting from WCW. Not much there. This was actually a book my wife got from her school's book fair. Not much there, but I appreciate the sentiments. Actually, it was a pretty interesting, cool book for kids. Up next, here are my coffee table books. Now, we're really going to go through these quickly. I'm running out of time. This is the WWE 50th anniversary book. Actually, in this book, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. That you open the book and the inside, I guess you could say not sleeve, but just the inside hardcover. It has the posters of every WWE pay-per-view up to that point in time in history. I love this. That is so sweet. And same as you end the book, this was just beautiful. Alright, moving on. The WWE Encyclopedia. This was the first edition. My wife got this book for me for Christmas. Well, we were still dating at the time. I think Christmas in 2010. Really, every WWE fan should have at least an edition of the encyclopedia. They're on, I believe, the third edition now, but the encyclopedia is just so much history in these books. So much history. Literally every person who ever competed in a WWE ring is profiled in this book. Excellent. Cannot recommend it highly enough. And I actually like the real cover better than the slip cover. Alright, 30 Years of WrestleMania. A really good book. I really enjoyed more the stuff about the early WrestleManias than the latter ones. So, not much to bring home there. Let me save that for last because I love that one. Midnight Express, 25th Anniversary Scrapbook. Midnight Express, one of the greatest teams of all time. Love that book. Tributes to one of my favorite, actually both of these books are two of my favorite wrestling books of all time, particularly the second. These are the tribute books made by Dave Meltzer, the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Basically, they collect the tribute, they collect the kind of obituary stories he did on various wrestlers. It's from his newsletter that I composed in book form, and just you gotta get this. I mean, great. If you ever want to know the history of guys, some of the deceased legends like Mr. Perfect, British Bulldog, Road Warrior Hawk, Terry Gordy, Elizabeth, this is the book for you. And if you're kind of on the fence about the Wrestling Observer, don't really know what it's about, or a little curious, pick up one of these books and I guarantee you'll become a fan of Dave Meltzer. This was the first one that was released. Excellent stories on Brian Pillman, the Von Erichs, Bruiser Brody, Andre the Giant, Rick Rude. WCW The Ultimate Guide, a book that a lot of people probably have never heard of. I actually got this book in 2000 we had a kind of a book sale thing at my church, and oddly enough, I found this gem of a book that I have not let go since. And really just fun to look back at WCW. Nice coffee table book, and like I said, it's It's a collector's item. WCW is never coming back, so this is a nice little bit of history. Now on to the final book, and this is the one that I've gotten the most recently, the WWE Great 100 Greatest Matches. Awesome book. This book, I am actually going to probably, I am going to do a more in-depth review on this book, but just to give you an idea, for the most part, this book is it's great overall. It's a great book. They kind of go through, as you can see, every match is given 2 pages, a 2-page spread. The photos, the colors, everything just point. This book was so well done from a graphic standpoint. And the match selection is really diverse. Of course, you have a classic match like the Hart Foundation against Team Austin from the '97 Calgary Stampede pay-per-view. You have Sami Zayn versus Cesaro, their classic 2 out of 3 falls match from NXT. You have the classic Sergeant Slaughter versus Pat Patterson boot camp match. A match that's not so classic, Daniel Bryan versus Dolph Ziggler. Another match, very underrated classic, Undertaker versus The Rock versus Kurt Angle. So this book is just like the WWE Encyclopedia. I think this is a good historical reference kind of tool that every WWE fan should have. And very good book that brings back a lot of memories, some classic encounters. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed taking a look into my wrestling reading material. Now, the only bad thing I have to put all these books back on the shelf and clean this up. Hopefully, actually I'm gonna do one better than that, because I will be back with the videos. Like I said, I have some time now. I can actually dedicate more time to posting videos like I used to. So you're gonna be seeing some more content. I hope to have another video posted before the end of this week. So once again, Jerron Dove, thank you for taking out some this time from your day to check this out. I hope you learned something, and I hope you'll pick some of these books up and add to your own wrestling knowledge. Well, I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I will talk to you again after a while.